Hear my voice, hear my song, look at me, in harmony.
Good afternoon and welcome. I am Ira Rosenzweig Cooper, President of Temple Emmanuel, and I'm pleased to be here today to launch the 9th season of Stephen C. Whittam Cultural Arts at Emmanuel. This year, we begin our season earlier than usual, but with so much happening daily and looking forward to what has been referred to as the most important election in the history of our country, we feel that an early start is warranted. Our first program features two eminent individuals with whom SCW subscribers are well acquainted: intelligence expert Malcolm Nance and New York One anchor Errol Lewis. We felt that it was entirely fitting at this time to invite them to address each other and speak to us in this, our first virtual SCW dialogue. What better time to focus on national security and the future of American democracy? This program is made possible through the generosity of Renee and Jack Salzman. For the last 8 years, SCW Cultural Arts has presented distinguished guest speakers, in addition to entertaining musicals and comedy performances. In fact, most recently, we added an annual choral concert to our list of spring events. For reasons of health and safety, we have temporarily curtailed the content of our usual series, but we will continue to present virtual programs of interest and entertainment, monitoring the months ahead for the ultimate resolution of the COVID-19 pandemic, which will permit the resumption of live programming. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well, and be sure to watch for announcements of future virtual SCW events. And now, I would like to turn things over to Rabbi Whittam, who will offer a few words and make proper introductions. Rabbi Whittam?
Thank you, Ira. It's a pleasure for me to introduce both our guest speaker, Malcolm Nance, and our moderator, Errol Lewis, both who are known to you through their appearances here at the Temple, and certainly through Malcolm's television appearances, and also through the books that Malcolm has written, which most of you have read because he is a prolific writer of best-selling books. Malcolm is the counter-terrorist and intelligence consultant for the U.S. government's Special Operations, Homeland Security, and intelligence agencies. He is also a counter-terrorism analyst for NBC News. Over 35 years, Malcolm participated in field and combat intelligence activity. He acquired expertise and experience as an Arabic-speaking special intelligence collection operator and field interrogator, as well as providing both covert and clandestine anti- and counter-terrorist support to national intelligence agencies and assets. Malcolm is a former Navy intelligence operator. He has eyewitnessed numerous terrorist incidents and/or participated in response operations. He has trained and advised numerous international and governmental agency personnel in terrorist tactics and countering extremist ideologies, including the U.S. Department of Defense, U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Malcolm is the author of several books, including Defeating ISIS, Who They Are, How They Fight, and What They Believe, The Plot to Hack America, How Putin's cyber spies and WikiLeaks tried to steal the 2016 election, and the New York Times bestseller, The Plot to Destroy Democracy: How Putin and His Spies Are Undermining America and Dismantling the West. And most recently published, The Plot to Betray America. Errol Lewis, our moderator, is a political analyst for CNN, regularly appearing since 2008. He is the political anchor for New York One News, host of Inside City Hall, a nightly primetime show that features in-depth reporting and interviews with a wide range of political and cultural leaders. In addition to his work at New York One, Mr. Lewis teaches at the City University of New York Graduate School of Journalism, where he serves as director of the Urban Reporting Program. Mr. Lewis writes a weekly column for the New York Daily News and has been a CNN contributor since 2008. Mr. Lewis was named the city's best columnist and radio show host by the Village Voice in 2010, and in 2014 was ranked 30 as the city's 100th most powerful people in New York City's politics by city and state newspapers. He is the co-editor of Deadline Artists, a 2-volume anthology of America's greatest newspaper columns. Mr. Lewis holds a bachelor's degree in government from Harvard University, a master's in political science from Yale, and a Juris Doctorate from Brooklyn Law School. So once again, please join me in welcoming Errol Lewis, Malcolm Nance, and Errol, will you begin the program?
Thank you, Rabbi Whittam. I am pleased to be talking with Malcolm Nance at this critical juncture in our history, so let's get to it. Malcolm Nance, I want to start with the worst case scenario. You say in your several books and in many appearances and speeches that President Trump is in effect a witting or unwitting tool of the Putin regime. What would a second term, if he gets reelected, what would that mean for the United States? How would it matter to the people who are watching this?
Well, that's a really broad question because so many things we've already seen, norms and standards, have fundamentally changed in our country. And the reason being is that when you came into the office of the President of the United States, you acted with dignity, decency, respect, and you maintained norms and traditions. Donald Trump doesn't believe in any of those things. He doesn't have any of those characteristics. And so that leads us to have to view him through an entirely new prism, the prism of essentially an arsonist in the White House, someone who wants to destroy not just the norms, but even ignoring laws, as we saw in the run-up to the impeachment, demanding that his staff commit crimes by having them refuse to submit to subpoenas. All of this brings into context how he behaves with Vladimir Putin, Russia, as I don't know what he sees it as. We see it as a strategic adversary. He seems to see it as a secret ally. And when I used words like, and he's an unwitting asset, which he was, I believe that really early on, and that's a term of art in the intelligence community. An unwitting asset is someone who doesn't know that these activities are being carried out around him, but the result benefits this foreign power. I mean, initially he started as a useful idiot, right? This is the guy who went to Russia, thought that he could get a building built over there. I mean, you know, how stupid do you have to be to think that you can offer Vladimir Putin, ex-KGB officer who may have as much, it's rumored, as much as $200 billion hidden away. Donald Trump actually thought that he could offer him a $40 million penthouse for free at the top of Trump Tower. This man controls 4,000 atomic bombs. So now put that into context, that Trump started out as this, you know, useful idiot to Russia, then transitioned to an unwitting asset because Russia was doing things in his interest and maybe Trump didn't know. But we know that about this time, this week, in 2016, when Donald Trump gave his Russia If You're Listening speech, that Trump became fully aware and knew Russia was working in his interest. And that was borne out by the Mueller report, that they were aware, they weren't working in complete conspiracy, but were working in such a way as that they would benefit from Russia's actions. That changes the picture entirely. That's a president of the United States who now works with, if not for, a foreign power. We just don't know the depth of that. So, in answer to your question, how will the United States in 4 years deal with that? Well, I mean, it's essentially saying that the Constitution of the United States has been sold to a foreign power and that it's essentially a fig leaf over whatever a hostile nation wants for the United States. It means U.S. intelligence will be completely and utterly gutted, which it's been right now. I mean, at the top, at the leadership levels, they're putting political commissars into some of these offices. They're putting amateurs into the intelligence community so that the material will still get produced. The spies will still go out there. The numbers will still come in. The estimates will still be written. Analyses will still be done. It's just that data, as it comes up the chain of command through the senior executive service or the senior intelligence service, will now be turned into political tools for a president who we don't know whether he's giving them to a foreign power or whether he's adjusting U.S. foreign policy to behave in such a way that it benefits a foreign power. You know, I say this often, and I believe it. I don't know if Donald Trump is anything more than a witting asset. I have never said that he's an agent of a foreign power. That's when you have a contract, right? That's when we actually pay you. You have tasking requirements to come back to us and give the spy that's handling you, fitness reports and, things like that. I don't know that. All right, until somebody gets into Deutsche Bank's records, I'm not going to know whether Russia is financially dangling money that, marionettes the arms of Donald Trump. But I will tell you this. Whatever is happening with Donald Trump now and has happened over the last 4 years, the next 4 years are going to continue to operate with everything that occurs to the United States will occur in a bubble that benefits Vladimir Putin.
What would you say is the sort of the Trump doctrine, the Trump foreign policy? And I'm asking these questions because you've made an eloquent case in 3 books, the latest of which is The Plot to Betray America. Right. You've made this eloquent case that there's a foul odor hanging over the White House, that there's too many coincidences for it to be a coincidence, that it threatens not just our way of life, but it threatens to sort of throw our policies off so that it's not in the best interest of Americans. And so as a journalist, I ask the so what question. If all of that is true, again, what will it mean for us? What will it mean for any given individual? I mean, there was this very disturbing case or stories, this credible reporting about bounties being put on the heads of American soldiers. That seemed pretty stark. I mean, we're talking about a volunteer army, so people are putting themselves in harm's way in order to defend the country, and unwittingly, I guess, being put up for sale in effect. But I'm trying to look as well at some sort of a broader sense of what does this mean for our nuclear policy? What does this mean for our European policy, if indeed we've got someone who's not acting in the best interests of the U.S.? Well,
you've already seen the effects of, your initial question was, what would Donald Trump's doctrine be? What is the Trump doctrine? And I have an entire chapter where I write about this in The Plot to Betray America, which is simple. And I can't take credit for the phrase. The phrase actually comes from Joe Scarborough at MSNBC, former Republican congressman, when he said, essentially, American foreign policy is to buy America, you buy this president. And so buy a man, you buy a country. This has never, ever really existed before. I mean, foreign powers have always influenced the United States. Roosevelt influencing FDR, these relationships as they existed. De Gaulle standing up to JFK, and that influenced his behaviors in Indochina, which would become Vietnam. Yeah, that's influence. That's power politics at its finest. We're talking about Saudi Arabia putting money into the coffers of Trump interest and behaviors of his family members, and that makes Donald Trump flip on his head to do whatever he wants. Like, for example, I don't know, cover up the murder, the decimation, and literally dicing into pieces and disappearing of a U.S. resident who is a critic of Saudi Arabia. And now, as we're finding out through many of the books that have come out, Donald Trump set the entire White House and the United States foreign policy establishment to cover this up because he wanted more arms sales. Any other president of the United States, Republican or Democrat, that has preceded Donald Trump would have punished Saudi Arabia, would have said, I don't want these 10 guys. I want you to come out and take responsibility for this. Otherwise, you're going to be buying your weapons from, you can go ahead and buy Chinese jets. You can go ahead and buy Russian jets. That won't save you from Iran, which is their number one threat. So Turkey, where we have Mike Flynn was plotting to rendition a Turkish U.S. resident to Turkey for $15 million. Trying to sell Russian nuclear power plants through Saudi Arabia, or to Saudi Arabia, the same power plant that the Russians had put at the Iranian Bushehr nuclear reactor, right, as national security advisor to the United States. It is a criminal enterprise masquerading as a government. So what you're talking about here, and let me put it into terms that some other people can understand. Imagine in comic books of Batman that the Penguin becomes the mayor of Gotham City, right? And well, to tell you the truth, it's already happened in the movie Batman Begins, right?
Yes.
Or Returns. But where criminals harbor criminal behaviors. Donald Trump has proven his behaviors over and over again. We see it with our own eyes, and anyone that denies it is living in an alternate reality where they just don't, believe their lying eyes.
Well, yeah, and it is one of your maxims that, in a world where there seem to be a lot of coincidences, there are no coincidences.
Nance's law, coincidence takes a lot of planning. That is an old intelligence saw that I've managed to take over for myself, but I've had to use it so many times in the last 4 years. There are no coincidences happening here. My claim to fame is that I was the first person in national media to come on air and say, hey, the United States is under attack. We are being attacked by a foreign power that is trying to put their favorite candidate into the Oval Office.
I was amazed by that. I have to say, when I first met you or first noticed you on television, the plot to hack America had just hit the book stands. But I was looking at the timing. I was like, he couldn't have started this in the middle of the campaign.
I did, actually.
Well, I mean, but it came out. I mean, the minute these facts were out there, you were out talking about things that we later saw sort of fleshed out in the Mueller report.
Well, I have a funny story about that. If I could just take a second. Yeah. It's the first time I met Joy Reid, who now, MSNBC, now primetime host. The first time I met her, really, we were in Philadelphia on the first day of the Democratic National Committee meeting, and the Bernie bros were having their Bernie riot on the basis of Hillary's emails being released. And I had been petitioning MSNBC to let me go on air and say, because I think there's a unique angle to this that media hasn't seen, because I'm not a journalist, I'm a spy. So I have a really different view of how things are seen. I don't have to check my sources. We steal our sources. Right. And so I saw, based on my experience, that this was an intelligence operation. This wasn't just Watergate done quickly. Why was Russian intelligence stealing this stuff? For one reason, to elect their candidate. So I went on air with her, and she didn't know why I was there. And she goes, Malcolm, I understand you have something you'd like to say. And I said, yes, the United States is under attack in a broad-based information political warfare attack in order to split the Democratic Party in two and get Donald Trump elected. And she was like, that's crazy sounding, but it was sincere, and from that point onward, I mean, that very afternoon, I sat down and started writing Plot to Hack America. I just put down what had to exist for this operation to have hacked the DNC, then elect Donald Trump president. And the book came out September 23rd. I actually wrote it in 5 weeks. And unfortunately, everything I wrote came true. As a matter of fact,
I remember it. I mean, it was, look, when the convention was going on,
Right.
and all of this turmoil was kind of happening all at the same time, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz had to step down
Right.
because of these embarrassing revelations that were in the emails that were released, and on and on and on. It was, for us in the mainstream media, you just had to process each story as it came along.
Right.
Like who's in and who's out? What's the new DNC chair going to do? What's the delegate count going to look like? How's Hillary going to respond?
Right.
And so forth. So we're kind of going, we're kind of plodding along 5 yards at a
because
time.
journalism's linear.
Yeah, that's
right.
why. And then and here's Malcolm Nance down in the end zone, right? Sort of saying like, I got it. This is it.
Well, I see, and I try to explain that to people, that journalism is linear. And as you get each new data point, you have to go backwards and double source that data point, but you're only seeing the story du jour. And some people like Vanity, Jane Mayer, at New Yorker, and some writers at Vanity Fair can put together big 10,000-word pieces that will spell out a story. Ronan Farrow is now really good at that, right? But that's what we do on a day-to-day basis in the intelligence community. I'm looking at a constellation of data, and what I'm really, I can see the dots to the pathway from one end of the galaxy to the next, but I'm really looking for the black holes where there is no data. And that's where we see what is the gravity that is being drawn in there. So, if somebody tells me, this Guccifer 2.0 character that claims he hacked these emails are in there, and everybody goes, oh, well, he's releasing Hillary's emails. And I saw the one press report that said, this guy's using a Russian Cyrillic keyboard. And I thought, that's another data point that I can hang my hat on.
Right.
And I believe that it's a Russian intelligence operation because I've seen these operations. I participated in operations that were very similar. So I don't say, ooh, Hillary Clinton's emails. I say, United States under attack by a foreign power to put a man into office who wasn't the Manchurian candidate. It wasn't brainwashing. It was a man who already believed in their worldview and their ideology.
Oh, it's kind of interesting. I've talked with John Miller, who I'm sure you know, who's a journalist turned intelligence professional.
Guy,
and one of the things he explained to me, he says, yeah, it's the same thing, right? The question is, what's the big story? What's a reliable piece of information? How do we put it all together, and so forth? So let's talk a little bit about how we got here, because I thought that was the most interesting part, or some of the newest stuff that was in your latest book, is the rise of Putin. We peel back the layers, and you sort of have to remember what happened in history. I mean, the breakup of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s is followed by this unbelievable transfer of wealth that ends up in the hands of a group of people who are now unbelievably wealthy. I mean, we have, I think, a concept here of like, oh, so-and-so, got control of a couple of oil refineries. It's like, no. They were in charge of the whole oil concession for like half of the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union, and they became multi-billionaires overnight.
Yeah, people don't understand. We view, if you're people our age, if you're a person our age, we know the old Soviet Union, right? Stand in line for, a day to get a right hand shoe, not both, not a pair, the right-hand shoe that may be 3 sizes too small, and then you go stand in another line for another shoe, and then you have these illicit markets where you're trading shoes to get a pair that can fit you, and in the middle of Moscow's minus 30-degree Fahrenheit winter, right? And we were just like, broken philosophy, horrible ideology, mass murdering government, KGB officers keeping the people oppressed, and everything belonged to the government, everything. Except, might even including the coat that you're wearing. The apartment that you're in, absolutely. When the Soviet Union collapsed, this is what happened. Every item in Russia, from every fire hydrant on one street to the, the steel caps over the subways, everything from the Moscow subway system to Vladivostok Airport to intercontinental ballistic missiles to tanks, everything became privatized. And if you were part of the mafia or you were part of the governmental system that was in place, you could take a piece of paper, right, write down what you wanted, and say these 40 apartment blocks have been purchased and are the legal property of, Joe Blowski. And Joe Blowski can now collect rent from all of the people who were living in there for free because the Soviet Union doesn't exist. And now you got to pay this guy $500 a month. 7,000 people now have to pay him $500 a month. But you got to kick us back 30% of that, right? This happened to seaports, airports, airplanes, taxis, police cars, everything. That all had to be liquidated. And Vladimir Putin, a career KGB officer up to this point, who was in Dresden, Germany, and I went to his office because as an intelligence officer, I wanted to be right. I wanted to see where he worked. What made him the people manipulator or human intelligence officer that he was? So I went to Dresden, and it turns out it's in a very nice part of Dresden, okay? Not the downtown by the river that was turned literally into ash by the Americans in 1945. It's up mountain. It's in a beautiful villas up there. As a matter of fact, there's just so many famous German composers that lived in that neighborhood. And he was in a nondescript villa that was next to a small guest house bar that was across the street from the KGB torture center. You couldn't see it from his front door, though, so it was very nice. He faced some really nice places. And when I went there, I talked to the woman who was who brought it back to being a normal building. It's a philosophy society right now. And they said they pulled microphone wires out of every door sill, like 100 of them. Wow. And the purpose of that was so that each KGB officer would know that at every door and every window, they were being monitored. And so, of course, you're going to be a pretty good loyalist in an office like that. Vladimir Putin, when he went to Dresden, he wanted to be a KGB officer. The story by Masha Gessen, his biographer, said that when he was 13, he went to a KGB open house, and he asked them, how do I become a KGB officer? And they laughed, and they go, well, you go to university, you get your law degree, you come back, the job will be there, right? Ha, 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 cute kid. That's exactly what he did. Became a KGB officer, was deployed to East Germany, Dresden, Germany. And his job was to flip tourist businessmen or people who had relatives in the East into spies for the West. Now, the big fat guys who were in his office, they didn't want to do that job. Well, it's the newbie. Give it to the newbie, right? The newbie wants to take every case. He does that. And he worked with the East German Stasi, the secret police, to turn people into traitors for their country. Interesting story. I heard this from a KGB historian in Berlin. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the Russians filled their cars with goods, right? Their little Ladas, filled it with goods and anything German they could get their hands on, anything they could steal, and they drove home in KGB ends, right? Vladimir Putin didn't do that. Vladimir Putin, it is said, went to Stasi headquarters and took the master book of everyone from the West that they had turned into a spy. And was going to blackmail people. Like, hey man, remember you came to that trip to Dresden in 1988? Yeah, you said you'd be a spy for us, so now if you gave me some money, or if you keep up these business contacts, I won't tell the West that you actually were a traitor.
So this is how it's operating. You've got, we use this word that, it doesn't quite capture what's going on, but we talk about sort of these big shots in Russia who have managed to make off with, owning the entire railway system or owning the entire uranium concession. And Putin is the head of their sort of gang, for lack of a better word.
Well, quick point. Yeah. Putin, when he left the KGB and went to St. Petersburg and became the senior aide to the mayor and started selling the city, his job was to bring the mafia under control using KGB resources. And of course, he cut a deal with them, right? Anything you bring in, we're going to give you X percentage forever. Even if it's not, if it's worth 5%, we're giving you 30. If it's worth 50%, we're giving you 30, right? We won't kill you. We won't grind your bones into dust.
Which they had the ability to do.
Right, and he was loyal to this mayor, and he made billions upon billions of dollars.
So these oligarchs are you know, the most cynical, you know, horribly wealthy, powerful people you can imagine.
Right.
They've got their guy in charge, and Putin kind of, you know, occasionally will snuff one of them out or redistribute their money, keep everybody kind of on pins and needles.
Right.
There is this mob mentality that's dominating the economy. There's what's left of the secret police, which is, you know, sort of still fearsome and still quite capable.
Right.
And so now we bring Donald Trump into this picture, and you talk about him as a businessman dealing with people who seem to be like him, but are much more cynical, much more wealthy,
Yes.
much more prepared to use all kinds of tactics. And you talk about, you know, how typically a Putin-esque kind of operation would work, where you say mice, right?
Right.
You dangle money or
Ideology.
ideology, coercion/corruption, or ego, right? And other than ideology, I think we've got three good possibilities for what might attract a Donald Trump.
Ideology is involved in that too, but I want to go back to this Russian money, right? You're talking a country that had literally nothing one day, right? And you could, within a matter of months, be a person who owned, at least on paper, billions of dollars of assets. Putin brought all of the oligarchs, the people who from 1989 till about 1999, he brought them under control as the first director, the first official director of the FSB, which is, I tell this little story. Here's the difference between the KGB and the FSB. One day a guy comes up from maintenance and he brings a screwdriver and he takes off the letters K and G and puts up the letters F and S. That's it. That's what the difference between the KGB and the FSB. There's more material changes, but for the most part, that's it. Putin, by the way, is the first director of the FSB, moves their headquarters back to number 10 Dzerzhinsky Square, right? Felix Dzerzhinsky, the head of the NKVD, Stalin's secret police, takes it back over. This is the place in Lubyanka Square, actually, where they would throw you into a furnace alive with your office standing outside watching if they found you were a spy for the West. He wanted to show that some parts of Russia were still strong and steadfast. But now in an oligarch society where there were multi-billionaire people and who are now taking all that illicit money, you got to money launder it. And what is the cleanest way to money launder it? Buy high-end apartments in New York, Paris, Geneva, my favorite city, the small village of Baden-Baden in Germany, which was practically owned by the Romanovs in the 19th century. The Russians went back and just bought every building at the maximum amount of money they could pay for it, because now their money was being laundered clean. And they came to New York City and spent that money. They created a new class of multi-billionaire that never existed. Putin was also a multi-billionaire because he got his cut from all the things he did in St. Petersburg, but then he became the leader of Russia by helping Boris Yeltsin get out of a corruption probe. And he did that by blackmailing the prosecutor general, by putting him in the room with two prostitutes, videotaping the whole thing, and then coming out in his first official statement ever in public and saying, as director of the FSB, I confirm this videotape is real. We now call that compromat, right? Compromising or blackmail information. This man is now president of Russia. As you say, he brings the oligarchs under control. I will let you keep your money. I won't kill you or your family, but you will do my bidding and you will have an FSB or KGB officer on your staff. That's the leadership class of Russia today has hundreds upon hundreds of billions of dollars of oil money.
So you don't come out and say, I have the proof that shows that Donald Trump was trying to do business with these people, but you do sort of list a whole string of data points.
I don't have to.
And note that, as Malcolm Nance, that there are no coincidences, and the Mueller report backs it up.
Yeah, history shows Donald Trump was desperate for Soviet money. I mean, you have to understand. And another thing, I take a lot of flack on this by a couple of mainstream journalists who are in complete denial about the reality as it exists. There's been so much reporting that Donald Trump, his first wife, Ivana Trump, was from the Czech Republic.
Right.
The Czech Republic in 1977 was part of the Soviet Empire, the Warsaw Pact. It was a communist country known as Czechoslovakia, the People's Democratic Republic of Czechoslovakia, I believe, and or the Socialist Democratic Republic of Czechoslovakia. And she, when she came to the West and married this billionaire or millionaire at the time, she called home. And when she called home, they were monitoring her calls. When she went to visit with Donald Trump, the reporting agent to the STB, Czech intelligence, the subordinate agency of the KGB, was Ivana's father.
Right.
Because you had to be.
And they made note that, like, this guy wants to get into politics.
Yes,
he wants to be
get
president.
into politics.
Right.
He was going to run against George Herbert Walker Bush and like the American Eagle Party or some other independent party, and then expressed this interest to go to the Soviet Union. Look, the man had money. They were interested in money, but they were also interested in influencing people. I don't believe that Donald Trump went over there to become a KGB spy or anything like that. I think he kept seeing Russia as, to be quite honest, the last bastion of white people who by 1999 had an enormous quantity of money and very slender, hot young chicks. And that led to the Miss Universe pageant in 2014. But Trump has a very naive attitude towards a very sophisticated people led by a career KGB officer, a man whose job it was to manipulate people to do his will and to act as his agents, whether they know it or not.
I know you've been asked this a million times. Do you think they have compromat on him? Do you
Definitely.
think that he's one of these businessmen who got caught in a compromising situation of which they have evidence?
It's either that or it's worse. You know, I say this constantly on air, right? Why does Donald Trump never say anything bad about Vladimir Putin? Because when you're in debt, you never badmouth your bookie, right? When you owe your bookie money, you'll wash his car, you'll take his kids to school, but you will never say anything bad about him. Whatever is going on with Donald Trump, it's either that debt that he owes to Vladimir Putin, or alternatively, and I write about this in my book, there is a class of people higher than the Russian oligarchy, right? I call them the globogarchy. These are the people to which money means nothing to them because they have so much money. I make this joke when I give speeches. I said, who knows where Puerto Banús, Spain is? Nobody knows where Puerto Banús, Spain is. And it's this tiny, tiny, tiny little seaport near Marbella where if you've got a $20 to $100 million yacht, that's where you park it.
Wow.
Right? Okay. And the only reason I know that is I lived in Spain, and I was let off in that port by a Los Angeles class atomic submarine. and we followed one of these mega yachts with the helipads in, and as I was waiting there, I realized there's a class of money that is above money, and it's also above flags, above loyalty, and above faith to anything except money. And the globogarchy, Russia is now playing and dominating in that world. Donald Trump has always wanted to be in that world.
Got it.
Here's the kicker.
Yeah.
Being president of the United States does not get him into that club.
No, that's right. You can have all
Doors
the
are
nukes
closed
you
for
want.
Donald.
Right.
You can have all the nukes you want. You don't have enough money to come hang out with all, with our, on my boat that has $20 million boats as landing boats, and where I can routinely bring in 100 strippers.
Well, your book does a great job of making clear that some of these these corrupt emirs in the Persian Gulf and some of these other folks have a level of resources that most of us never know or even think about. But let's bring it back to America. Open societies are always vulnerable to those who want to weaponize our openness against us, right? We've known this certainly since the end of the Second World War. There's an argument, of course, that this is exactly what happened with the hacking of America, which you wrote about in the first book. That they turn us, they're not necessarily trying to occupy the country or destroy the country even, but to weaken us, to confuse us, to turn us one against each other. So the two questions I have there are, number one, do you think it's working? And number two, how do we fight back?
You know, you're absolutely right. This is why I constantly come back to Vladimir Putin. I got into a great fight with Matt Taibbi of Rolling Stone, who lived in the post-Soviet Russia for a while when it was wild and crazy and Americans could go there and do anything. And you know, he angrily called me and he said, "You said that the Russians have this way of manipulating mindsets of population. Where did you get that? Where did you get that?" I said, "The NATO handbook on Russian information warfare. We study this stuff too, you know." And here's one thing that we do. We read all of their scientific and military journals. And there were several articles which became known as the Gerasimov Doctrine, the chief of staff of the Russian armed forces, in which information would be a critical warfighting tool to manipulate an information framework around an enemy population in which an invading force, whether they come physically or psychologically, would be seen as an ally. So that you create not a fifth column, you take two columns of their population and turn them into your allies. So that you don't have to put a soldier in there, you can psychologically invade and manipulate their information space. They tried it in Estonia, Georgia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine. They still do these operations where they craft an information narrative so that, and I say this about Donald Trump, look, when Donald Trump sees Russia, it's like he has a pair of rose-colored glasses on. But they are rose-colored glasses in which the frame was crafted by the FSB, Russian intelligence. The lenses were ground down by Vladimir Putin himself to a level of fineness that he wanted. And then Donald Trump was so in love with the prospect of getting money, he picked the glasses up, put them on, and now believes everything that he sees. He lives within this bubble. And I think it really started in earnest in 2014 when he went to Miss Universe and had a private 2-hour meeting with the top richest 14 men of Russia, to where Russia's great. Look, they got hot women, they've got money, they're white Orthodox Christians like myself, or white Orthodox but not Christians for him. You know, they're like me, and we should be natural allies against brown people and others. And they have money, right? So it goes back to that spy hunting, spy manipulating doctrine of mice, M-I-C-E. Money, of course they seduce him with money. Ideology, his ideology is he wants in on the global oligarchy, the global cub, all right? Coercion, they don't have to coerce him, they co-opt him, right? Co-option. And then they manipulate his ego, which is the easiest thing in the world to do with Donald Trump.
Right? Even amateurs can do that.
Yeah,
I've seen reporters do that. Reporters you and I both know. What's the best defense? My sense is that the institutions that are supposed to prevent an unscrupulous character from diverting the country into the wrong place, the checks and balances that the framers put in place are pretty much working. I mean, he was impeached. You know, he wasn't removed, but he was impeached. The media, thank God, is still free enough that, you know, he takes a pretty serious pounding on an almost nightly basis.
Sure.
The polls that come out, he may not like them, but they're out there. Universities are open and people are doing their research and so forth. Even the courts, even as we saw in the impeachment, you know, Marie Yovanovitch and Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, you know, people who are, you know, part of the government at great peril to their own professional success, were willing to step forward. So what else is there? I mean, is there just November 3rd and then that's it? Or are there other things that we can and should be doing?
Well, I mean, everything you described, calling out Donald Trump as what we would call the resistance, right? Which is people who are there to defend the norms, the standards, and the guardrails that were put into place. Donald Trump understands he doesn't need them. He doesn't need them at all. He has been essentially acting as a petty, you know, dictator and an autocrat in the way that he wants. He also has learned that so long as he has that 36% of people who also wear the same rose-colored glasses, who live within that information sphere that was crafted by Russia, who deny anything that we say, any word. If I say that the sun is out, they'll say, no, it's not. You know, Donald Trump says that it's not. So long as they exist, 1/3 of this country will refuse to believe in the democracy as it existed, but the one that exists inside their head that they've been told by Donald Trump. That is a perfect example of Russia's information crafting warfare, which they didn't have to do most of the heavy lifting. Donald Trump did it for them. So what do we do? What can we do? Well, November 3rd is going to be a defining moment in American history, whether the American experiment dies on that day or lives on that day. Because if he wins and we get to November 4th, I think, it's been said by many analysts, it could be the most terrifying 6 months in American history. Greater even than the Civil War, greater than Valley Forge when everybody wanted to go home, right? In the middle of winter in abandoned Washington. Then those were some desperate hours. Then that the United States could be at a point where we become a full-blown dictatorship. And I don't use that word lightly. I use it in the context of an intelligence profession who has seen dictatorships. We're seeing all the starts of Donald Trump's authoritarianism. And now he's used the fig leaf of the Attorney General to legitimize everything that he's done. But you got to take heart that 60% of this country rejects him. And what he wants to do is tiptoe between the raindrops to an electoral college victory, and he may even just declare the whole thing null and void. But the Constitution is what it is. January 21st at 12 noon, there will be a president of the United States, and the system is strong enough, certainly at the armed forces and most other bodies of government, to where people are going to, I think it was Nancy Pelosi just recently said, we've become very adept at evicting people, trespassers from government offices.
It's a funny way to put it. Yeah.
It's a perfect way to put it. Yeah. But we are it. The American people voting. And if they've never voted before, they voted for Barack Obama and won't come out this time. You don't vote this time, you vote for Trump. You don't vote for the person who opposes Donald Trump, Joe Biden. You vote for Trump. You vote for a third party. You vote for Trump. You are voting for the destruction of the American experiment. Everything as it has existed, right? From the very moment, and I say this deeply with great passion, I'm from Philadelphia. I take it very seriously, the things that were written down at 5th and Chestnut Street, right? The votes that were taken there, right there at Constitution Hall. I see the Liberty Bell, I tear up because I was born, raised, steeped in that environment. Every Nance has served in the armed forces since April 1864. Every Nance, because we love the American experiment. It's flawed, it's hypocritical, it goes backwards sometimes, but it always moves forward.
It's got to be frustrating to you that in the end, as far as I can tell, this election is going to turn not on these very important issues that you raised, but on the handling of the pandemic.
Well, I think pandemic aside, okay, because the handling of the pandemic has just been essentially mass murder. This has just been criminal negligence. We all know this. It's been said that had the measures that New York State took, all right, in March and April, had been done on a national scale, we would have death statistics lower than Korea. We would have been at around 6,000 deaths. Wow. Donald Trump would have been hailed as a hero. He probably would have guaranteed his presidency.
Yes.
But it's not the way he operates, okay? He's a megalomaniac. That's the word that they use in the German press when they write about Donald Trump. Megalomaniac.
Right? Just as an adjective, not even capitalized.
Not even,
right?
No. I mean, they think he's nuts, and that it's his psyche that guides everything. That's true, but I write in the last chapter of the book a treatise on character.
Yes.
Right? And I love, big fan of George Washington. Everybody says, well, you're African American, you gotta love Lincoln. Of course I love Lincoln. But Washington set the norms for this nation. He could have left the presidency and kept the presidency as essentially a monarch, right? Like they say in the musical Hamilton, right? The Washington says, let's show them how we leave, right? Let's show them how we transition power peacefully. Washington was not only a brilliant general, not only was hours away, by the way, of being captured by the British when Benedict Arnold turned him over along with West Point, okay? that man established everything that is right about the American system of government because he did it right the first time. He put people against each other, he let them fight it out, and then he made the ultimate decision. And then, like he said, after X number of years, you want to go home and sit under your fig tree and let his slaves go free, right? His wife wasn't too good at that, but he was, right? Trump defiles everything.
Well, it's interesting
about him.
You do this interesting excavation of Benedict Arnold. Like most
Oh, yeah.
people, you only hear about him as a name that is just synonymous with traitor, right? I mean,
Right.
like for your crossword puzzle, right?
Right.
You don't real. Number one, I didn't realize he was actually a gifted commander, right?
very gifted
Led these
commander.
daring raids into Quebec,
Oh,
and
my
had
God,
done
yeah.
all kinds of stuff. So he was legit and was important, but he was also corrupt. He's grifting. He's grifting.
When he got bored, he started grifting.
Oh, interesting. Okay. But he gets busted. Washington hits him with under the circumstances, relatively minor penalty, after which he basically goes over and throws in with the British.
Yeah. I've been accused actually of saying Donald Trump is equal to Benedict Arnold. I want to put this on the record. I have never accused Donald Trump of being equal to Benedict Arnold. I have said, if everything we suspect is true, he will be greater than Benedict Arnold. Problem is, in the epilogue, I have to apologize to Benedict Arnold.
Who at least was, in fact, a war hero.
He was a war hero. He fought for the country. Look, if he had never met Peggy Shippen, he probably would have beat the British at West Point, and the revolution would have ended at least 2 years earlier. But a lot of interesting things to be learned about how Benedict Arnold led to the end of the American Revolution. Principally because Washington
He hated him so much
he
and
was
wanted
so
to get him.
slighted. Did you know he dispatched 1,200 men from West Point who were going to be the men that Arnold betrayed, and said, Benedict Arnold's operating down in the Hamptons. How'd you like to go get him?
Yeah.
And they were like, we're good. So he sends this expedition down to capture Benedict Arnold with orders to Lafayette, the Marquis de Lafayette, don't take him alive. George Washington. It's like Barack Obama saying, Bin Laden doesn't come out of that building alive, right? If you were ever to hear those words, you'd be like, that's not the Barack Obama or George Washington I know. He did not, in other words, you find him, you summarily execute him, right? That's how angry he was. But because Arnold was operating down there and the British went down to Yorktown, the American army went down there and the war ended.
Right.
So Benedict Arnold did us a favor. But there is a bigger traitor historically than Benedict Arnold. I'm not going to give up who it is. But it was an American officer who was captured by the British, lost a critical battle, was relieved of his command by George Washington. But it turns out that 56 years later, at the end of the war, we find out he had betrayed the country while he was in captivity. He wrote a battle plan to defeat George Washington. That is what we're going to find out about Donald Trump. I think he will be closer to this other character than to Benedict Arnold.
Meaning years after the fact.
Because Arnold had the decency to run away, leaving, I swear to God, George Washington at his breakfast table at West Point, out near Garrison. And went to the HMS Eagle, got on the Eagle, sat down, wrote a letter to Washington, said, yes, I just defected to the British, but my chief of staff was not in on it, and my aide-de-camp were not in on it. It was my decision alone. I'm a traitor. All right? He had the decency to do that. Donald Trump, I suspect at some point in American history, his presidential portrait will have a black shroud put over it.
Wow. Okay. All right. Malcolm Nance with the hard facts, the hard truth. Let's send it back to Rabbi Whittam.
Well, thank you both for today's program. It was indeed inspiring and so informative, and we're grateful for the two of you for this program today. But while the program was on, 4 questions were called into the studio, and I have 4 questions for you, for the two of you, and let me give you the first question. It was called in by Steve Blank, who is the editor and publisher of Blank Slate Media, which puts out 6 weekly newspapers on Long Island. And Steve Blank asks, if Donald Trump loses the presidential election, do you believe that he will accept defeat and leave the White House in a peaceful manner, or might he declare the election was rigged and the results invalid? If this were to occur, what options would there be for dealing with the situation? Malcolm, do you want to handle that?
That was a very difficult question. This is why I say, no matter what happens here in this election, this is the election to save the American Republic. We have to blow the electoral margins off the map. This needs to be 2008 plus for the defense of the United States, so that there can be no question, right? No question whatsoever that there was no rigged election. Because he's already hinted just recently that mail-in ballots are rigging the election. He mails in his ballots. He votes by absentee voting. He is trying to create a premise to where he can contest the election. But again, I think the system is resilient enough to resist that. And again, Nancy Pelosi's great phrase, the U.S. government has a history of kicking trespassers out of the offices, right? I think Donald Trump will find out that the system turns off without him.
And as you noted as well, the Constitution specifies that the term ends on January 21st, right?
If
With
not
or
sworn
without,
back in,
it's not like you get to stay because we haven't figured out who won the election. Your term ends.
That's precisely the phrase that he's going to use, right? And this is where people are going to have to choose to be patriots or not. The Constitution is what the Constitution is. There has never been anyone that ever contested an election. I mean, Hillary Clinton was gracious enough to just say, hey, that's over, right? We could go for a recount, blah, 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 try to get 77,000 votes. Transition of power. George, when Barack Obama won the presidency, no one had a problem with this. He did a very dignified and gracious transition of power. The transition between George W. Bush and Barack Obama is beautiful. In the dignity that they both shared for the Oval Office, writing each other notes to each other that will stay in American history forever. This could be ugly. And what happens if he doesn't want to? What if he decides that with the Attorney General, he is going to create a legal precedence for this? 12 noon, January 21st, 2021. Someone is being sworn in, and the person that is sworn in will be President of the United States.
Well, thank you for that answer. Appreciate that. I'm sure Steve does too. A second question was called in by a resident of Jericho, Long Island, New York. Her name is Linda Drum. And Linda Drum asks this question. The significant institutions and agencies of government that were once independent appear no longer to be independent. It looks as if the president doesn't want to govern through these agencies, but has put them all aside in his desire to rule. Is this true? And if it is true, are we sliding away from being a democratic system of government?
Yeah, we've been on that slide for 4 years. We're finding again that norms and traditions are not laws. And because they are not laws, Donald Trump, for example, here's one, virtually most of his government are acting directors or secretaries, so that he does not have to run the risk of not getting a person confirmed by Congress. And he does this routinely so that he can defy the government and defy the legitimate, and this is strange, he does not want to legitimize the rights, authorities, and duties of the House of Representatives or the Senate. He doesn't want it. He now thinks the Senate is a tool of his, so now, when he can do that, he'll do that. He'll ask for an investigation or something. But this man does not believe that there are 3 branches of government. He believes it enough that there's a judicial branch, so he tries to put in his lackeys. And the problem is now he's running smack into the law. The law is the ultimate guardrail. But what happens when you just suddenly decide to defy the law? With the fig leaf of the Attorney General over your shoulder essentially saying, yes, he could. I just want to call attention to one historical fact. If you feel bad about what's going on with some of these organizations, especially the Department of Justice, go watch the movie Judgment at Nuremberg, which is about the 3 US judges that are trying Nazis. And I want to point out that who are the Nazis that are being tried in Judgment at Nuremberg? They're the Supreme Court of Nazi Germany. They're the lawyers and the Attorney General of Nazi Germany. It's the judiciary that's on trial for validating crimes and saying, oh, yes, you can steal all of the property of a Jew because they're an enemy of the state. And there's a great speech in there by Spencer Tracy about how you made every crime Hitler did legal within the eyes of Nazi Germany. You know, that precedence can be brought forward to the United States also.
Third question was called in by Professor Michael DiNocenzo, who is Professor Emeritus of History at Hofstra University, where he has taught for more than half a century. He also writes a column for Blank Slate Media / The Island Now. And Professor DiNocenzo's question is this: can Congress be encouraged to have a more active role in foreign and military policy? Regardless of any president's political party, is it prudent to leave extensive life and death powers in the hands of one person and his chosen advisors?
You know what? Right up until George W. Bush started essentially rubber stamping, having Congress rubber stamp everything, Congress was deeply involved in U.S. foreign policy. They were deeply involved in what weapons would or would not get sold. Because people understood and obeyed the laws, obeyed that Congress had the power of the purse. We have an administration now that does not even care that they have the power of the purse. Trump went out and did sales to Saudi Arabia in violation of the law. He doesn't care. So when people just say there is no law, or I'm a law unto myself, or as I like to call him, you know, King George IV or King Donald I, whatever he wants to see himself as. So, you know, and I think it's wonderful that it is a professor emeritus in history reminding us of this point.
Well, what do
this
you
has been standard.
Well, what do you think's been going on there? Because I do remember from the 70s and the 80s, like these guys who were like the barons of Capitol Hill,
right?
You did not think you were going to sell like some new fighter jet to Saudi Arabia if they didn't approve of it,
That's
right?
correct.
And half the time they wanted part of the parts to be built in their district,
Right.
so we understood it was political. But they seem to have surrendered a lot of, and I wonder if that's because the stakes are much higher, and there's a lot of ambiguity here. It's easy to be caught on the wrong side of, say, a vote to go into Iraq.
Well, do you remember the word earmarking?
Oh, sure.
Right? Earmarking.
It's a dirty word now.
It's a dirty word now, but to tell you the truth, I think it needs to be formally put back into Congress where you can say, I am going to legally horse trade for your vote. You want this vote? You know, you want to give weapons to Saudi Arabia, then I will give you $500 million for a new Lockheed Martin plant to be built in your state, or Ingalls Shipyard to expand building littoral combat ships out to doing the new frigate or something like that. And you are going to vote X, Y, and Z. The parties under Newt Gingrich became completely polarized. And to be honest, it was Newt Gingrich that started this downward slide of polarization to where you were loyal to the party and you would hate the other side, hate them viscerally as a personal enemy. And now I think that when the new Congress comes in, I hope there's a new Democratic president, a new Democratic Senate, and a new Democratic House. And here's the one thing that needs to happen. Those guardrails and norms and traditions must be made criminal law. Right? You violate them, we need to make these into laws. It needs to be a law that the President of the United States...
We're punished by something short of impeachment.
Right. Well, yeah, punish... Yeah. Well, that you could... First thing that should happen, day one, minute one, they have to get rid of the rule that a president cannot be indicted. That wasn't even it wasn't even a rule, it was an opinion.
Sure.
Well, that's a tradition that needs to be codified into a law
Upward-
that
right,
a president
up
can
or
be
down.
indicted,
Right,
and any indictment should lead to immediate impeachment and and removal from office.
Interesting. You mentioned the fighter systems and the defense contracts. Quite by accident, when there was a lot of talk about, Susan Collins of Maine,
Yeah.
allegedly a moderate Republican. Why does she keep voting with the majority? Why does she keep voting with Trump? Why does she keep voting? And quite by accident, I started looking at some of the local papers up there where they were ecstatic because they're building all kinds of battleships
Yeah.
and stuff in Maine.
Yeah.
And it's like, a formal process back like the old days, it would be understood. And that would sort of
but
be
you
part
could-
of the news story.
You
that
could
it's
understand it, but you could also counter horse trade.
Yes.
Right, because they would say, oh yeah, you're going to be building ships up at Portsmouth Shipyard, or we're going to station 3 frigates there permanently. You will get no fuel. The Navy will not be allowed to bunker fuel up there, and the Navy will go, well, we'll just have to leave those ships in Norfolk. All right, so what they used to call it? They used to call it pork, right?
Sure.
Your pork in that bill now becomes a liability. So that encouraged people to have to speak together. I'm not saying that you should do this. It wasn't open corruption. It was you advocating for your state.
Yeah, look, in the real world, to me, it's not such a bad thing if you can say, we'll build you a new bridge in Idaho
Right.
if you vote for my human rights bill.
Right.
If you vote to denuclearize Germany.
Right.
There's all kinds of different possibilities.
And the reason that I advocate this is not because, people are going to say, oh my God, you're the swamp. No, the swamp is when you control all the money for yourself and you give it to your buddies under the table. That's the swamp. You could see the pork that went into earmarking, all right? And it was a great American tradition, the Postmaster General, scenario in the vote for emancipation under Lincoln, right?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
But sometimes it does come down to those individuals who want to see themselves in history. John McCain, with his thumbs down vote, when Susan Collins screwed him, right? It's just like, okay, I'm now the only man in history. I'm all that stands between 26 million Americans keeping health care or losing it. And I know what John McCain thought, because I used to teach at the school that was named for him, the Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape School, that when he was in the Hanoi Hilton prison, right, with a dislocated shoulder, which they would torture him with by tying him up horribly to the ropes. And he came back, and military health care took care of him. He thought, I'm not going to take that away from American citizens.
Sure.
And I have one more question. The question comes from Jack Solzman, principal and founding member of Kings Point Capital Management, LLC, vice president of our Temple Emmanuel, and sponsoring today's program with his wife, Renee. And Jack asks this question. If Joseph Biden Jr. is elected president, he says he will raise, as soon as it is possible, corporate income taxes from the 21% level that now exists to a level of taxation that is much higher. Now, Jack's question is this. What is the logic of raising taxes dramatically soon after he is in office at a time when this country is still suffering from the worst unemployment in the history of our nation? Employers, I would think, need their revenue not only to keep their businesses afloat, but also need funds in order to rehire the unemployed. So do you want to comment on that? What do you think of that?
This is Barack Obama's executive officer. This is a man who was a United States Senator.
Joe Biden. Yeah.
And Congressman. He knows how the Hill works. He's not going to raise taxes on day one, right? He's promising you, in the way FDR promised the rich, that you are going to have to pay your fair share. What's the old saying? You want to live like a Republican, vote for a Democrat, right? You have to understand the 2 greatest expansions in American history that were not caused by war was Bill Clinton raising taxes on the American corporate body, which gave us the single greatest growth and longest period of economic prosperity in American history, and then Barack Obama saving the entirety of the United States and world economy, right? By going back and looking at the wealth and how it existed within the United States. You want to be a good American citizen? We just got 4 years of patriotism in our face. Here we are in a critical, life-threatening crisis that will, can, and does not care about your family if you're rich or poor, right? It is time that we all come together and that all resources be brought to bear. And like FDR, you make your argument that there's money to be made in saving America. There's money to be made, right? Fair, decent amount of money. When I was in Iraq and we were bidding out contracts in support of the coalition forces, they had caps, 10%. 10% of $3 billion is a fair amount of profit, right?
Yes.
I mean, if you feel that you have to rob us at 30%, maybe you shouldn't be in this game.
Right.
If you're offshoring all your capital, all right, and that you're doing it to have a tax shelter, maybe you shouldn't be an American company. We don't know. All I'm saying is this. If you stay with Donald Trump and this nation collapses economically, you take away health care for 28 million people in the middle of a global pandemic, and coronavirus goes for 5 years, and we may not even own the vaccine. Because Donald Trump has already said he essentially wants the vaccine to be developed by America for America only. That's insane. We should be on a Marshall Plan. We should be on a global a global campaign throwing tens of billions of dollars for whoever can get this vaccine, so long as we should be setting up right now public-private partnerships to be able to produce the 8 billion units of vaccine per year that we need and the world needs for the sake of saving the world and saving our economy. That is not how we are doing it now. We are doing it in the worst way possible. Interesting. There's one of my favorite books of all time is a book that I didn't write called The Virtues of Captain America.
Okay.
And it's an analysis of Captain America as a character from the comic book, the very beginning of the comic book up through the movies. And you have to understand, he was a character. He was a person who was raised in the Great Depression. And all of his values are steeped in those nationalistic, but also caring and sharing values, what some people would call socialism. And by the way, I worked for the largest socialist organization in the world at that time, the United States Armed Forces. Right? I mean, in some instances, we're practically communists. I mean, universal health care.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
We even have fire departments. So, but the character of Captain America, the reason that when he was given his, super serum, his goodness became greatness is because he shared the values of that era, and he saw everyone working together as being the fundamental glue that held the American flag together, the stitches that held the American flag together, and that our position in the world was the fact that we were good and great despite all of our faults, and that our enemies were bad and evil. And even now, up into the modern movies, he maintains these black and white positions. But when you starve in Brooklyn through the Great Depression, and you're trying to get in the army as this insane large war that would kill 70 million people starts, you better be the good guy, right? You don't want to be the baddies, as they say. We're at that point where that is the decision that we're here to make. Whether we collectively come together to be the America that saved the world in 1945, or allies of the enemies that hate everything America has ever stood for. Money is causing the corrosion of that hate.
Okay. Some stark choices and a lot of food for thought for people. I urge everybody to take a look at Malcolm Nance's work, and we thank you for coming by.
It is my pleasure to be here.
Speaking now for the President and for myself, and for the listening and viewing audience. I want to properly thank you, Malcolm Nance, and you, Errol Lewis, for today's presentation. We are so grateful. And for all of us, don't forget to wear a mask. It has become, for now, the new normal, and so is properly distancing from one another. This has been offered to us by the people who know better than we know what can help to reduce risk and keep us safe as we confront this insidious virus. And let us be encouraged and strengthened by our faith to believe that there will be a better tomorrow, not only for us, but for everyone everywhere. And again, thank you for viewing and listening. Until we meet again, don't forget, wear your masks and stay safe.
Give me your hand. The earth is softly spinning. We're friends at the beginning of a new road, and here we stand.
Give me your heart and let me get to know you. There's so much I can show you on this new road, in this new land. From this road I can see all the possibility of one bright world. Take my hand and you'll see all the possibility.
One bright world,
One song in this one.